DW Africa Link.
The International Day of United Nations Peacekeepers is a day dedicated to honoring the men and women who serve in UN peacekeeping operations worldwide. Their dedication and sacrifice are truly commendable. It is observed every year on the 29th of May. Now, this year's theme, the future of peacekeeping, underscores the necessity for these missions to adapt to the evolving global challenges and complex conflict environments. Conflict zones in parts of Africa, such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, have experienced a significant presence of UN peacekeepers. So what successes have been chalked, and what are the persistent challenges? That's what's coming up. I am Eddy Micah Jr., and you are welcome to Africa Link, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
Since the late 1990s, UN peacekeeping missions have played a crucial role in efforts to bring stability to conflict-affected regions across Africa. Backed by the UN Security Council, these missions have expanded far beyond merely monitoring ceasefires. They now encompass a range of activities, from protecting civilians to supporting political transitions. Today, more than half of the UN's active peacekeeping missions are based in African countries, including the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Central African Republic, Sudan, and South Sudan. Peacekeepers are expected to protect civilians, support peace processes, and facilitate humanitarian assistance, among other duties. Joining me for more on this is Major Tadziwana Kapeni from the Malawi Defense Forces. He served as a public information officer who deployed as a peacekeeper in the DRC. I also have DW's Ben Shemang in Abuja, who has reported extensively on Nigeria's peacekeeping missions abroad. Hello and welcome to the Africa Link podcast. Major Kapeni, first tell us why it is important to observe the International Day of UN Peacekeepers.
Well, Eddy, this day serves as a day on which we honor the brave men and women who made the ultimate sacrifice for peace. So it serves as a day in which we remember their lives lost during the line of duty, as well as their families who were left behind. Secondly, it also serves as a day on which we appreciate the work that peacekeepers are still doing in conflict zones, trying to move out of their comfort zones to ensure that there is peace and stability in areas where there is conflict. So it is very, very important to observe this day.
Thanks for that. What impact has UN peacekeeping had on these conflict zones on the African continent?
I must admit that there's been a huge impact by the United Nations peacekeeping missions in DRC as well as elsewhere. Let me reiterate, Eddy, that when I was deploying in DRC, we had a lot of attacks on local population, more especially men and women. But when we deployed in such areas, we saw a decline of such attacks. So I must admit that there's been an impact on that mission.
Right. So you're talking about a positive impact. Of course, there's also been challenges. We'll get to that part in a bit. But I'm definitely very interested in your personal experience, right? You were involved in peacekeeping missions, particularly in the Eastern DRC, as you mentioned. That's a region known for its conflict. Can you share, some of your experience from your deployment there? What was it like being a UN peacekeeper, trying to somehow keep the peace there?
Well, it was both a challenging experience as well as a good experience. A good experience in a sense that I was able to contribute somehow to peace in the DRC as well as the global peace. So it was a good opportunity for me as an individual as well as part of a country that contributed its troops to ensure that there is peace in Eastern DRC. And challenges were also there. So first of all, it was an issue of getting into the unknown, whereby you are entering into a conflict zone, not knowing what is going to happen to you. But still more, it was an issue of the call of duty. We need to make that sacrifice to ensure that our counterparts elsewhere enjoy the peace, the freedom, and the stability that is enjoyed elsewhere.
Right. So it's basically day by day, you were just, hoping to maintain peace, but not aware or have no idea what kind of attack was going to happen, how you're going to deal with it. It's almost like living the day by a miracle almost, isn't it?
Exactly, Eddy.
Right. So that was some years ago. What would you say is the difference now? What are some of the challenges still that active UN peacekeepers are still facing in the line of duty? Has anything changed?
Well, I must say that some challenges persist. So I'll look at some 4 critical challenges that UN peacekeepers face, more especially in the DRC where I deployed. First of all, AD is about the size of the country. DRC is big, it is huge. And people would want to have footprint of UN peacekeepers on each and every area where there is conflict, which was challenging in a way, because that trying to ensure that there was a footprint of UN peacekeepers on each and every area where there was conflict, it means that the UN peacekeepers were overstretched. And when it means, well, what that means is that the lines of communications are also extended. And it was indeed a challenge. And that challenge still exists up until now. We have a lot of areas in the Eastern DRC where there is conflict, but the UN peacekeepers cannot be everywhere at a particular time. So that was a challenge, and it still is a challenge. A second challenge, Eddy, is about disinformation and misinformation. I deployed at a time when there was anti-MONUSCO sentiments, where the locals were claiming that United Nations peacekeepers are not doing enough to ensure that there is peace in DRC. Now, I must admit that even the illegal armed groups are using the same channels to provide inaccurate information, to misinform the public about the UN peacekeepers. So it was a challenge, and it is still a challenge. The third challenge is about the operation security, whereby when you are planning for an operation, before the mission is executed, you are going to find that information has already been leaked to the illegal armed groups. And that is a huge challenge. Over the years, it has been, whereby you plan an operation to conduct a mission on an illegal armed group operating somewhere. And by the time you be going there, you're going to find that the people, the illegal armed groups, the personnel are not there. So yeah, that remains a challenge, Eddy.
Ben, you have reported extensively on peace missions, right? In conflict zones across West Africa, particularly Sierra Leone and Liberia. Could you tell us a bit about these missions that you reported on?
Yes, thank you, Eddy. What happened in the case of Liberia and Sierra Leone, you can simply call it what you call Africa's direct intervention on African issues or African conflicts. The United Nations, yes, became a partner. Then African Union became a partner. But ECOWAS simply felt they should come out with what they call ECOWAS Monitoring Group, ECOMOG, to intervene first in Liberia, where Charles Taylor and his group under the MPFL, talking of the Liberian People Liberation Force, they took up arms against the government of Samuel Doe. So there were killings here and there. Virtually every embassy left Liberia. And therefore, ECOWAS felt they should not leave that country to just go down the drain like that. So soldiers were contributed from various countries. The first commander was General Arnold Kwaino of Ghana, and thereafter Nigeria took over when Samuel Doe was killed. So the mission was to ensure that first there was a peace building effort. There was also the peace enforcement should there be resistance, and of course there were resistance here and there. So at the point they used the kinetic approach, they used force, they used the gun, armors, whatever you can think of to ensure that some people were overrun and brought to negotiation table. So at the point you could see that virtually every infrastructure was down. Any airport that you can think of, schools were closed. There was just inhumanity so unleashed on fellow human beings by fellow human beings.
And so basically you feel that the peacekeeping mission then, made up of different African countries, was effective in dealing with the conflicts there?
Exactly. It was very, very effective because if you look at the concept of ECOWAS, a common economic community of West African states, and their protocol would just say, look, there has to be free trade in terms of security. Once a nation was affected, it was treated as the 16 members of the ECOWAS, as it was called that time or known that time. Any attack on one nation was an attack on every other nation. So they felt that they should take the destiny of the West Africa into their hands, and they did it wholeheartedly, contributed troops, contributed equipment, feeding and all that. But at the point, the United Nations would assist with some tokens, and that was what happened, just to ensure that Africa itself was leading in terms of providing peace in Africa.
Right. I mean, from the way you're talking, Ben, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you seem to suggest that in the good old days when, Africa spearheaded these peacekeeping missions, you seem to suggest that things were better than now, sort of countries working under the UN peacekeeping umbrella. Am I the one saying these things to you, or is that what you're trying to suggest?
I think that we tend to toe the same line with you, Eddie, because if you look at it, the UN at the point was becoming too overstretched. Global peace that was needed. You could see wars in Bosnia-Herzegovina. You could see Lebanon was not at peace. Many other places, Haiti, many of them were like that. So the UN was overstretched. So Africa decided through ECOWAS to say, look, we can do it in our own case, and they came out together. So I think that, yes, looking at what ECOWAS stands for, they need to live in peace, they need to progress, they need to even have a single currency for the region. All of those things were perceived even before what you have the euros. So West Africa felt they should just have a common market, common currency, and you could see the vision was just there, and they needed that peace to ensure that these things were achieved.
Right. Major Kapeni, let me come to you now, because if we're to go by what Ben is saying, which is what others have been saying, that when with the current UN peacekeeping forces in these conflict areas, there's not much happening. I mean, you can talk about the DRC and other areas where many would say that, in fact, the situation is either worsening or nothing much has changed. What do you say to those who make these accusations?
Whenever you are in a peacekeeping mission, indeed, you would want to see a change. You would want to see a country coming back to stability. You would want to see a country coming back to social and political or economic development. And in the absence of that, one would suggest that maybe the mission is failing or the mission has failed. Let me not preempt or let me not disagree with those people that say that some missions have failed. But let me put it across that although some missions claim to have failed or to have not achieved their objectives, some missions are indeed achieving their objectives. Let me go back to what Benny had said about maybe Africans taking the leading role in such kind of missions, whereby when we leave African problems to Africans to find their solutions. However, we cannot, I must repeat that, we cannot do away with other international stakeholders for such assistance. So that's how I can comment, Eddie.
Let's discuss the principles or modus operandi of peacekeeping. In some instances, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, peacekeepers are not supposed to engage directly with armed groups. Do you see any difference with how conflict was resolved on the continent before UN peacekeeping was introduced, or before UN peacekeepers became a key part of peacekeeping on the continent? What has changed? Because again, when Ben was talking, he seemed to suggest that, like talking about Sierra Leone, Liberia, when countries like, Nigeria, Ghana, and other West African forces came together, however they did it, there seemed to be a sort of positive outcome that didn't take too long. But these days with peacekeeping, you can, again, some of the arguments that people have had against UN peacekeepers, that you're there for very long, decades, talk about the DRC, MONUSCO, there for like 30 years and not much has changed. So can you give us that difference from how conflict was resolved on the continent before and now until when UN peacekeeping was introduced?
I must say that there's been a difference indeed. However, the challenge with those engagements by regional bodies like ECOWAS or AU, or indeed Southern Africa Development Community, was an issue of sustainability, whereby those organizations have had challenges on how to sustain missions. For example, there was a time when the Southern African Development Community was the first one to respond on the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But with issues of sustainability, the United Nations came in, and that's where these calls or these claims are coming in that the United Nations have really stayed long in the DRC and there is nothing to show for it. Recently, there was a Southern Africa Development Community mission in DRC, which has just ended against the M23 in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Now, you see how there's been the dynamics between these two missions. And MONUSCO is still operating there. But now the Summit DRC, we are withdrawing.
Ben Shemang, in the mid-1990s, Nigeria and Ghana were lauded for their peace efforts, also in Rwanda, in the aftermath of the genocide against the Tutsi. Is there still appetite for such alliances to help bring peace, Ben?
Yes, there is need and there are such alliances. But one, again, is worried as to sometimes some will say the interruptions from other developed countries who would want to use Africa as a test ground to see the latest equipment they've manufactured, how efficient or the efficacy of all of that. But in all, you can see that every time ECOWAS, SADC, and other regional bodies are always meeting to ensure that they find peace.
Trying to wrap this up, I think the elephant in the room, especially when it comes to peacekeeping or UN peacekeepers, I'm coming to you, Major Kapeni, with this one. There's been reports about UN peacekeepers in the DRC accused of gross misconduct, that involved sexual abuse of young girls in exchange for food, among other, allegations. What do you have to say about that?
Well, Eddy, first of all, let me say that it is an unfortunate occurrence. It is something that should not be happening. But let me also commend the United Nations for its stance on issues regarding sexual exploitation and abuse. That in which case, when the claims have been proven to be right, there have been strict punishments, strict measures on individuals as well as troop contributing countries from which the perpetrator is coming. So it is an unfortunate occurrence, and that's something that shouldn't be happening elsewhere.
Thank you very much for that. Major Tadziwana Kapeni from the Malawi Defense Forces, who served as a public information officer while deployed as a peacekeeper in the DRC. Thank you very much for your insights. Also, DW's Ben Shemang, our correspondent in Abuja, who's also reported extensively on Nigeria's peacekeeping missions abroad. Thank you also for sharing your thoughts with us.
Africa is changing. Don't get left behind. Tune in to Africa Link.
Now, despite their crucial role, UN peacekeepers in Africa confront a myriad of complex and evolving challenges. In some cases, they have also faced serious allegations of widespread sexual abuse, exploitation, and gross misconduct. The need for accountability in these missions is more pressing than ever. So are UN peacekeepers doing more harm than good? Who holds them accountable? And where hasn't there been any prosecutions of UN personnel? Let's hear from Paula Donovan, co-director of AIDS Free World, whose organization launched the Code Blue campaign to end impunity for peacekeepers.
The reason there haven't been prosecutions is that the United Nations is holding on fiercely to the right, although it's not written down anywhere, that they themselves can prosecute, can investigate and judge their own staff. So the UN, including the Secretary General, they're fond of calling themselves the UN family. And yet, when someone is raped in a peacekeeping mission, in a peacekeeping country, they have to go and report to one member of the family that they were assaulted by another member of the family, and then they get no more information, and behind closed doors, family members decide whether or not to investigate, whether they believe the claim, and then whether or not a prosecution is in order. And in most cases, family members decide that others within the UN family who've been accused of sexual exploitation and abuse should simply not be truly interrogated by anyone with the legal authority to bring them to justice. So that first and foremost, fundamentally, the conflict of interest has to be ended. That conflict of interest can only be ended if the United Nations member states, the governments, create special courts that will be attached to every peacekeeping mission that have no connection whatsoever with the Secretary General or the Secretariat. So these should be independent, autonomous courts where people can go and report. If they've been assaulted by a UN peacekeeper, for instance, a woman can go and walk into a building and know that she's reporting this crime to someone who's not paid by the Secretary General, who's not employed by the Secretary General, and who isn't part of this sort of UN family. And then those entirely autonomous, separate, independent, international investigators would have the legal authority to look into the crime, prosecute it if necessary, and conduct the trial right there in the country where the crime was committed, so that the victims can see that justice is being served, and the people who are prosecuted and sentenced could then do their time right in the peacekeeping country, so that finally people will have faith that there really is some rule of law and some justice in peacekeeping that applies equally to the United Nations personnel the way it does to everyone else in the world.
That was Paula Donovan speaking to DW in the past about the global campaign Code Blue, which aims to end impunity for UN personnel. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So please share your thoughts with us on our Facebook page, DW Africa. Listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. Don't forget to click follow and subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe, and I am Eddy Micah Jr. Thanks for listening.
DW News.
Here are today's top news stories and why they matter. Fear has gripped southeast Nigeria as banned separatist group declared another sit-at-home protests. Streets across most states like Anambra, Enugu, Abia and Imo remained deserted for the better part of the day as residents fearfully complied with the order issued by the indigenous people of Biafra. The group, led by jailed Nnamdi Kanu, issued a directive to commemorate Biafra Remembrance Day, a solemn remembrance central to their separatist agenda. Security forces across Nigeria have been placed on high alert as the separatist group enforces its directive throughout the region. Authorities have issued stern warnings against any attempt to enforce the order through violence. The group, which advocates for secession from Nigeria, has officially been designated as a terrorist organization by the federal government. Well, DW's Samson Omale tells us why this story matters.
Since 2021, these sit-at-home orders have triggered a devastating circle of violence and economic collapse in Nigeria's southeast. Today, markets that would normally be bustling with traders and customers stood eerily silent. Schools remained shuttered behind locked gates, and the few vehicles venturing onto the roads moved with palpable urgency. Anxiety was evident, and some analysts say the compliance of the sit-at-home protest stems not from solidarity but from deep-seated fear. What began as symbolic acts of dissent have transformed into a protracted crisis with far-reaching consequences. The IPOP movement is pushing for the independence of Nigeria's southeast. Kanu is currently on trial on treason charges in the capital Abuja, but secessionist sentiment remains strong. I spoke to some Nigerians, and here's what they told me.
The sit-at-home imposed in the southeast is not a good omen at all, because it's going to affect the perception that people have about the southeast.
The southeast has lost a lot as a result of even the sit-at-home declared. Now the major one that they want to also really be observed on 30th of May will be very, very catastrophic to the entire polity, both politically, socially and economically in the entire southeastern part of the country.
And Congolese have taken to social media in a fierce condemnation of their justice minister, branding him a hypocrite who preaches against corruption while practicing it. Minister Constant Mutamba is an embattled man after the National Assembly last evening voted to allow an investigation into accusations that he misappropriated nearly $20 million that was meant for reparations for war victims. Here's what you need to know. The 37-year-old minister, a post he has held since May 2024, is known for fiery statements, including proposing death penalties for those who steal taxpayers' money. The nearly $20 million was from a fund paid by Uganda to compensate Congolese victims of fighting between Ugandan and Rwandan armies during a 2000 war, according to prosecutors. This sweet have been recalled by German-based candy maker Haribo. They are known as Happy Cola Fits. The recall only applies to 1 kilogram bags sold in the Netherlands. They are being recalled because traces of cannabis were found in at least 3 bags containing the product. So here is what you need to know. Haribo has asked customers to return Happy Cola Fits candies with a best before date of January 2026 and the product code L341-400-230-7906 for a refund. Despite the low number of products found to contain cannabis, the Dutch Food and Consumer Protection Authority says Haribo had issued a complete batch recall as precaution. And finally, football lovers have a special date this Saturday to wind up this season as Paris Saint-Germain and Inter Milan will face each other in Munich for Champions League trophy. What is your prediction? Who will win? And that's all we had time for today. Are you interested in constructive analysis of news happenings? Just hit the subscribe button, like, and comment on the stories we highlight. DW Africa is the channel's name, and I am Chinaza Samuel.
DW. Made for minds.
DW Living Planet.
Well, that night I had a dream about a very large, larger than your average size horse, like a working horse type horse, and completely very dark, almost black, and just a little white right here on their nose. And in my dream, the horse's name was Charlie.
That's Suzanne Hagmeyer, a mother of 3 living in Colorado. She didn't know it then, but the dream would turn out to be more than